Welcome back, everyone, to another Life After DD214 podcast. And today I have with me a very special guest, my second Marine, Quintin Garza. Quintin, how are you doing today?
Good, man. How are you?
Not too bad, my friend. Not too bad. So, Quintin, you and I know each other because we go to the same gym. We really didn't even know that we were both veterans,
Oh
and
no.
we just kind of just started chatting one day.
Yeah, and I think it was more one of those things where you kind of recognize your own. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean?
Yeah.
And it's the demeanor and how we all act. So it kind of like we gravitate towards each other. And I think more of the guys that go to the same gym that we do, that are service members, you could tell right away. You know? So yeah, that's how we found out. I was in the Marines, you were in the Army, and
Yeah, absolutely. And you ended up with a really interesting story, which we were going to get to later on. But let's jump all the way to the beginning. Let's talk about when and why you first decided to join the Marine Corps.
I think most people, first of all, I'm 38, just turned 38 last week. And
Happy birthday.
I appreciate it, man. Thanks. And like most people that join the military, I saw 9/11, happen morning. We were having breakfast and stuff like that. I was a junior at the time, and that year I don't have any older siblings, and I have a
Mhm.
cousin who is like my older brother. And when 9/11 happened, he joined right away the Marines, and he was deployed out to Iraq. And he ended up seeing combat and things like that. But I remember we were worried all the time and stuff. So I could have gone to college. I could have gone to play sports, top 5%, all that stuff. And, I just made the choice. I remember when I told my parents, I was like, hey, mom, dad, I'm not going to go to college. I'm going to go to the Marines to be with my cousin. And his name's Vincent. And I was like, I want to go to be with Vince. And man, they lost their mind. They're like, are you crazy? Oh, you've been working so hard and this and that. I was like, well, this is what I want to do. Okay, I'm already 18. Like, you can't stop me. So I ended up making that decision, joined. And this was, 2005, already in the summer. Right away, went out there, boot camp, did all combat training, MOS and stuff like that. And then I joined my unit. And when I joined my unit, it was 2nd Battalion, 1st Marines. They're out in Camp Pendleton. When I joined them, they were deployed. They were still
Okay.
deployed, and they were taking heavy casualties over there because it was pretty bad. It was like at the very beginning. I was a kid, I was like 18, and anybody that tells you that they weren't scared, I was in my pants because I thought I
Yeah.
was gonna get out. I thought I was gonna get sent straight out there to catch up with them with zero real training, and I was like, oh my god. But, it ended up happening, those guys were out there. Unfortunately, they sustained a lot of losses, came back. And then we didn't deploy for about 2 years, which was kind of odd because usually the East Coast and West Coast, like they do these deployments, like, they'll do one and then we do one, they'll have the cycles. And it was the West Coast who was supposed to be cycling through. So we would have had 6 months off and then regrouped and gone back, but they didn't. And so at that time when they came back, a lot of like half of the battalion changed out, right?
Okay.
And then the other half, that was a younger half, stayed for like 3 years, and then all the new guys came in and filled in. So imagine like all of these guys were together for 2 years of training, right? And that's
Yeah.
me like, going all 2 to 3 years training with these guys, and then we get deployed. And to me, and I'm kind of flowing like with the timeline here, right? Obviously, there's more stuff in between where you're
Yeah.
homesick and you're doing all this training and you're doing all these hikes and all this other stuff, but that's kind of like just the nature of the beast. But what I'm getting to is like that happens, then we're back. We trained for these 2 years and super combat effective, combat ready, right? And they're like, man, for sure we're gonna deploy to a combat zone, right? They're like, hey, you guys are gonna go to a MEU, 31st MEU. They used to call it 30 worst MEU, right? Because you get sent to Okinawa and everybody gets in trouble. So we went out there. We were supposed to be there for a little bit, and we might have gone to combat, but ended up, Bush did that big push of troops, and we ended up staying out for a year in deployment.
Okay.
So we trained with the Korean Marines, Filipino Marines, Australian Marines. So we were training with everybody. We were just policing that part of the world pretty much. We were the battalion landing team for them. So we stayed out there for a year. Everybody got in trouble, including me. I don't know. I got busted down. I lost a couple of buddies in Liberty in Australia, and got back late and stuff like that. And I remember to my first sergeant was like, "Hey, if you don't come back to the ship with your guys, don't come back at all." And I was 19 years old, and I was like, "Oh my god!" I stayed out all night looking for him. And I remember the next day, I was like, in this 19-year-old brain, right? I was like, "Man, I'm gonna sneak on back to the ship. Nobody's gonna find out."
Right.
Oh my god! And I remember, well, that night. Long story short, they called my mom. They called my parents. They thought I had gone UA. Nobody expected that. They're like, Garza would never do this. This guy would
Right.
never do this stuff. Um, but just to like explain, like after all this time that we spent together, we all knew each other really well. So they knew that that was really uncharacteristic of me. So I thought that I would sneak in back to the ship and be like, I'm gonna sneak in. Nobody's gonna know I was gone. I hope these guys are there. Man, it's like 4:30 in the morning, and I'm walking to the bus stop, and then we're in Brisbane, Australia, and I see one of my buddies run up to me, grab me from the back. He's like, Garza, where the F you been? And I was like, what? Oh man, I remember I felt like somebody punched me in the stomach. Turns out the colonel finally found out, that I was missing. I had all the NCOs, staff NCOs, everybody. The whole battalion was out looking for me.
Oh man.
I
But
know.
didn't you say that you lost two people? Like you were looking for them, were you not?
Yeah. I was looking for them and I couldn't find them. And then my brain was like, okay, they probably went back to the ship. It's already past curfew. I have to stay here and sneak in the morning.
Yeah. Okay.
So that
Got it.
was a 19-year-old brain, which is like I can sneak back in and I'll be fine. Oh man, was I
Right.
wrong? Man, I got NJP. They busted me down in rank that same day. They didn't even wait. The colonel took me up to the deck. He had the whole company, not the battalion. One of the companies was out on the flight deck. And man, did he went in on me and no, I don't believe you. I'm pretty sure you were with some girls and this and that. And I was like, no, I lost these guys. Believe me. And then the sergeant mayor's like, no, shut the hell up, devil dog. And they just went at me for a while. And I was like, okay. Well. And they did it. And at the time, I was the colonel's driver, radio operator, all that stuff. So, and they went hard at me. But that was one of those things. They said you're not a Marine until you get NJP'd, right? So,
That's fair.
so then that happened. Went back. Um, my buddies did make it back to the ship, right? They left me, but they were super
Mhm.
wasted and they were young too. So I think at that time I was like, man, but they got it worse. They didn't get busted down, but the whole deployment they didn't go anywhere. I got in trouble, got busted down, and after that, like the colonel went and talked to me that same day, and everything was kosher. He's like, look, I just have to make an example. I hope you're going to be better than this, blah blah blah, and that happened, right? So we're all good. And at the time, what was worse was that I was the legal chief for the battalion.
Okay.
So I took care of all the legal matters and all that stuff too. And
Okay.
so and so that was like worse, right? But
Yeah.
no, it all worked out. Um, I was really good at everything I did there, being a Marine, and I had tons of friends. And it's one of those things where I guess it's just in my nature to get along with people. But when I get along with somebody, and especially like them, it really is like a brotherhood. So that's why all these people were out looking for me. And, my staff NCO at the time, I remember he's the one that called my mom. And we're in Australia, get time difference, right? My mom's fast asleep and calls her and tells her like I'm missing out in the middle of nowhere. He's crying. So George, if you're hearing this, I know you were crying. My mom told me. but yeah, I still talk to him and stuff, but uh that was a hell of a thing. And when I left 2-1, they put it on my plaque too. They said all the things that I did, all this good stuff and everything. And even they put on the bottom, even going UA in Australia. Oh,
There you
but
go.
yeah, no. I mean, and that's kind of like one of those things that helped me mature. Get better. saw a lot of stuff when I was in the military, what real poverty was, going to the Philippines, all these places, helping all those people, Um, so aside from the brotherhood, the camaraderie, all that stuff that you get, like for such a young person, I was exposed to a lot, which brings a lot of perspective. And I think that's why, like, when you and I ran into each other at the gym, and then we started talking about, like, hey, you know what, you were in the military, I was in the military, and you can tell, you know, I'd like to think we're relatively young. Still,
Yeah, I'd say so. You're still two
I
years younger than I am. Well,
yeah,
okay, a little more than one, but yeah.
so we're young, and it's like for people our age to have experienced as much as we did, I think that's what helps you carry yourself, right? But it also puts you in this like really narrow group of people because the only people that seen what you've seen and done what you've done are your other military guys, right? Your fellow brother at arms, right? Your army guys, your marine guys. Those are the guys that understand it, right? And then kind of came back to California. Then I didn't deploy anymore because I said our deployment was extended for a year.
Okay.
Marines are not used to being deployed for a year. And just like I got in trouble, a lot of people got in trouble, all that stuff. We came back, we had to regroup and do all this stuff. And, um, then I got transferred to another unit, was there, and I said, I'm just going to get out. Like, it wasn't for me to be enlisted and, retire from there. My
Okay.
plan was always to go back to school, become an engineer, things like that. I actually wanted to be a patent engineer at the beginning, but I wanted to be an engineer regardless, right?
Okay.
Like a patent attorney with a degree in engineering. But when I wanted to get out, I had been on the flight decks, I'd been with the Navy, all that stuff, and I saw the Navy fighter pilots and stuff on deployment. And when I wanted to get out, that's what I wanted to do: go become an engineer, come back, become a pilot, fighter pilot, and then transition into NASA, use that kind of, later down the road. Um, but man, it's like you say, you can make all the plans you want, and God's just gonna laugh at them.
That's true. Yes.
And it's one of those things where like, yeah, I'm gonna do this, do that. You got everything going for you, and then life happens. I had some incidents that happened before I got out, and that changed all my plans. Right?
Okay. Yeah, that happens.
Yeah. So, and it's one of those things where still like that was 2009, and it's still difficult to talk about some of the stuff, right? Um, but you know, just trying to stay on topic and tell you like the story of how it happened. We were there, California. I got extended a couple of times. They really wanted me to reenlist, to keep going. And Marine Corps, obviously, they want to retain as many people as they can, and you make a lot of lifelong friends. And one of my things was getting to know people
Hmm.
and knowing people that were in high colonels, sergeant majors, all of that stuff, befriending all of those people and treating them like human beings. Because when you're in the military, it's you see the rank and you get really scared, right? A lot of people are like, "Oh man, I don't want to mess with this guy." Staff NCO, he's a colonel, he's a major, all this, a general. You know, it's it's like a mindset that you have when you're there, and that I gave myself when I was there. That I would tell people that I'm a man first, and then I'm a Marine.
Okay.
So I treat you as a man with respect, right? Regardless of who you are, what your rank is, and stuff like that. And that's how I acted the whole time I was in the Marine Corps. And I think that's what made me, kind of successful when I got out and being able to maintain those long friendships. So I get transferred to another unit, 11th Marines. They're an artillery regiment, and I EAS'd from there. So once
Okay.
I got out, I did all the everything you have to do, to get ready the month before you get out, physicals, all of that stuff. It's supposed to prepare you, but in reality, I feel like it's just you just go there, sit there, and sign some paperwork, and that's it. Because nobody
What
tells you
what year was this?
this. This was in 2009.
Okay, 2009. So they're just you said you're like 30 days out from getting out of the Marine Corps, and they're just pushing you through getting everything cleared, getting all your paperwork signed, and not really showing any how to do things, like how to prepare a resume, like no
None.
transition
No.
class whatsoever.
Not what to expect, and what the classes that we did have, they were a joke. It really was, when I got out, I signed up for school right away. um I went to the University of Texas Pan American out in Edinburgh. Man, it was I was shell shocked. Like, I really was. I went. I didn't know how to study. I didn't know how to be in that environment. Like, it was totally different. You're left to your own devices. It's like there's nobody watching out for you. Nobody telling you what to do, how to do it, when to do it. Um, it's all on your motivation, right? And it's like nobody's there to push you, right? When you're in the Marines, it's I used to tell people, well, yeah, I got paid to work out and hang out with my friends. That's really what I felt like was, right? You get up, you go do what you got to do your job, and you're with your buddies, and you're there 24/7, right? When I first joined, I was scared of deploying to a war zone, and then after being with them for 2 years, I was like, whatever happens, happens, but I can't leave these guys alone, because at that time it changes, right? You're like, I'm there for them. I'm not here for myself or for anything else. And if they go, I want to go because I want them to come back. You know what I mean? And then out of nowhere, you take your boots off and now you're in regular clothes. You're a civilian, right? And there's nobody like that. You're by yourself, and you have to find out what's the next step, whether it be I get a job, or I go back to school, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And you wake up on your own schedule. You wake up on all this stuff. The first year I gained a whole bunch of weight. You know, I used to wake up every day 4:30. I used to, no joke, like swim a mile a day, run at least 3 miles, and work out for like 2 hours every day
Hmm.
on top of doing my job. Nothing else to do, right? And then obviously on the weekends you party with your friends, and then you repeat every week. But you never got tired of it. It's not that you say, "Hey, yeah, I loved being in the military and stuff like that." It's that I loved being with my brothers and sisters. But I was there, and it's like I loved being with those guys, and then out of nowhere, I'm alone,
Hmm.
right? I have my family, my mom, my dad, my brothers. My other brother was in college. He was going to UT, and he was doing nursing and stuff. And I didn't go back to live with my mom and my dad, but I went, got my own place, used my GI Bill, my benefits, and I went to school. And that was the other thing too. Like, nobody told me, "Hey, go do this. Go and talk to the VA. Make sure you got to do this for your GI Bill, right? You got the Texas Hazelwood Act." Nobody told me of all the things that are available to me here in Texas. So there's so much help, but I had no idea of what the help was.
Yeah, that's a good point. And let's jump back a little bit. We'll re-engage that. So as you're getting out, you had already mentioned that you wanted to go to school. That like your dream was to go become an engineer, and then fighter pilot, get to NASA. Things change, but you're still um, convinced that you need to go be an engineer,
Yes.
which I love that. But so you're in Camp Pendleton. What made you decide to go to University of Texas Pan America?
So I was torn between going to UT
Mm-hmm.
and
UT in Austin.
where, yeah, UT Austin, where my brother was. He was still a sophomore at the time, but I didn't want to be there and kind of that's his own experience. So I felt like, to me, it was like engineering and physics, math. It's the same no matter what school I go to. But I didn't want to go back and be with my parents either, right? When I graduated, I left so I could be my own person, made my own decisions. So when I came back, I said, you know what? I don't want to. I felt like if I would have gone back to my parents, I would have fell in this rut where I would have been like, you know what? I don't want to do anything. I want to be here and stuff like that. And it's kind of like this comfort zone that you get in, and I kind of wanted to avoid that. And I think it would have been worse. Not saying that I was super motivated to do all these things, because it was hard. It was hard to do everything. But that's why I said, okay, instead of going there, I'm gonna be close to both of them, like my mom, my dad, and my brother. I'll split them, be over here in Edinburgh, only an hour away from from my parents, and it was like 2.5 hours, 3 hours from my brother. So I was like, okay, well,
Perfect.
I'll be here. I'll be my own man and go to school and start doing that.
Okay. So, but that also brings up another interesting point, right? Yes, you're from Texas. And for those of you who don't know, Texas is massive. Okay. You could drive 12 hours in one direction and still be in Texas. And so the fact that you can't really just say, like, yeah, I moved back to Texas. For you, you were still living in a completely separate area, 2.5 hours away from your brother, an hour or so away from your parents, right? You really had to start from scratch on your own in a place that I don't know if you've ever been to Edinburgh, like before in your whole life. But yeah, basically you started completely over by yourself.
Yeah,
And
and
what was that experience like?
well, fortunately, I had a best friend who was going to the university there,
Okay,
and that
cool.
kind of made it a little bit easier. I didn't move in with them. I rented a house, and they moved in with me,
Okay.
and then we kind of started living together there for the first year. Um, but man, that first year was difficult. I kept dropping classes. It should have taken me 4 years to graduate. It took me 5 years to graduate. Right. That first
That
year,
happens.
I dropped calculus twice. One because the first time I couldn't understand my professor. She was foreign and she had a really heavy accent, and I think
Okay.
at that time for me it was really hard to to get into this schedule where it was like go to class and then leave and go to class and then leave. It left me a lot of free time because I was used to like waking up at a certain hour and doing everything that I had to do, and then boom, I'm off.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And
It's like,
how old were you when you started going there?
oh, I was 22.
Okay.
I was 22.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you were still young enough to not be mature enough is what I'm
Oh yeah.
saying.
Definitely, definitely, definitely. Like I still look. Hindsight is 2020, right? And it's like I ran into one of my drill instructors when I was driving from the valley from Brownsville, Texas, all the way back to Austin, Texas, and there's a border checkpoint there, about an hour and a half away from Brownsville. I ran into one of my drill instructors there, and at the time he was a sergeant, E5, and he had already had two combat deployments, right? And he was super young. This guy was like maybe like 19, 20 years old. Like he was super young. Like he joined the military, and I think he was barely 17 when he joined, and he had done all this stuff. He had like huge stack. Man, guy was so young. And I remember we were all looking at him and we're like, dude, how's the guy a drill instructor, right? I
Yeah.
ran into him and stuff, and we talked. He remembered me. We had a good chat, and it's like back then I felt like I was like this little like a baby compared to him, right? Because of what he had been through. But you look back at it, and dude, they're all kids. We're all kids.
Yeah.
My buddies that are still my friends, they're burly E7s, E8s, E9s now, right? They're getting ready to retire and stuff like that, or get move on to the next step. It's and I that's why I said we're still young.
Yeah.
Like to think that somebody that's 38 can command 300, 400 people, 500 people, a whole company, if you're a sergeant major or something, and you're in your late 30s or early 40s, that's pretty crazy, right?
Yeah. We were having this conversation, not you and I, but another group of people and I were having this conversation that, you know, a 20-year career sounds long, but for the most part, if you decide to join the military at the age of 17 or 18, 20 years means you're retiring at the age of 37, 38, right? And for people like us who are just now turning into 38, 39, and 40 years old, like we recognize at this point, we actually still have a lot more life left to live and to give um, for anywhere we got to do. So really, if you think 20 years is long, right? You're 38 years old, and all of a sudden you're like, wow, if you had done it right, you could actually retire with full benefits and everything, and just not really have to go back to work. And I only know of one guy who's done that, um, out of our group, right? He's like four. He just turned 40, and his entire life is just, he's a stay at home dad,
Yeah.
and uh, he drives his daughter to sports events because she's got sporting practices and things like that. So like that's his life.
Yeah, and that's everybody's, it's all, it's very like particular to the person, right? And it's gonna be like, yeah, I thought about that too. Yeah, I didn't think about that all the time, and I see my friends and they get promoted, and then I'm like, man, this guy's super young and he's already you know a master sergeant and stuff like that, and then he's getting ready to retire, and you're just like, what's he gonna do once he retires? And it's like most of these guys will go and they'll get into real estate, they'll do something else, but it's a drastic change of your life because they call it life. You're a lifer, but you're not really there for life. You're there for 30 years max. And if you stay in for those 30, you're retiring before your late 40s, early 50s, maybe. And that's one of those things where it's like, and you have to have really high billets to be doing that stuff, right? So that's one of those things where it just wasn't for me, at the time, because like just thinking about like monetary compensation and stuff like that, like what you get to do, how it is, and a lot of people are like, "Well, yeah, you're in the military, you don't make a lot of money because you don't.
No.
Nobody gets in there to make a lot of money. You are afforded a lot of opportunities, but nobody ever tells you. If I would have known, I would have started studying when I was in the military. I would have
Mhm.
started going to school. I would have started doing a lot of things. They offered a bunch of classes. There were satellite communication classes. There was classes there that were worth tens of thousands of dollars as a civilian that you could have taken while
For
you're in the
free.
military for
Yeah.
free. Nobody ever tells you this stuff because nobody cares. They're like, hey, you um, are you need to show up, PT, and you need to do what we tell you. That's it.
Yeah.
Like nobody's looking
Yeah.
out for Rob the person. I mean, hey Rob, this is what you need to do to better yourself, and when you get out of here, to be the best you can be.
Yeah. I just find that very interesting because, well, actually, kind of not necessarily interesting. I find that very disheartening because, um, your situation really highlights that, where like that actually happened to you, right? For me and other people that I know, like, no, we did know about these other courses. Like, we now, granted, myself as an officer, it was my job also to not just do them, right, but also like explain to my soldiers, like, listen, this is out there. You want to raise your GT score, you need to go do this, this, and this. I also had the wonderful opportunity of going to ROTC when I was in school, um, which introduced me to green to gold
Yeah.
opportunities. And so, because I knew that, and I knew soldiers who were like, I want to do this, I could give them a perspective that they were looking for from the green to gold.
And that's one of those things too. Like as enlisted, right? Um, I think it's when you're junior Marines and young NCOs and stuff like that. It really is up to the type of leaders that you have,
Hmm.
right? Not
Yeah,
everybody's the same.
absolutely.
You're not gonna have a bunch of Robs, things like that, or like I took care of the guys that I did have, right? And tell them like, hey, look, I need you to I want you to get meritoriously promoted to do this, right? So we got to do X, Y, and Z, and we'll put you up for this, and then boom, get them promoted before I got out. So I did that for a couple of guys, but at the end of the day, it's like I feel like I did have a lot of friends, but it's like in the Marine Corps, at least, I feel that it was more of a camaraderie, and we really didn't care anything outside of that. It was all about the training. It was all about being together and unit cohesion. That was it. Outside of that, nobody was pushing like, "Hey, you should go and take this class. Hey, you should go do this." It was. It's never talking about like civilian life
Got it.
because there, it's like, "Hey, you think about hey, I might deploy tomorrow, I might be doing this, I might be doing that, but you have to be always ready. And that's kind of those things where it's like you wake up, breathe Marine Corps, everything going forward, and that's all it is. But then you get out and you go to college, and it's completely different, right? And it took me a whole year, a year and a half to get into the groove of it. And I want to say my first 2 years, I was, I wasn't doing so hot at Pan Am. So I was like, oh, I'm gonna change to universities, and then I changed to where my parents were, so I
Okay.
could so I could get, restart my GPA and get a good GPA, because I needed a higher GPA to get into the engineering program. So I said,
Yeah.
okay, I already got all my basics done and everything like that. So then I went there, I did that, got into the engineering program, GPA was doing good and all that stuff, and then this is crazy, and you might not believe, but these two universities decided to merge. They merged. They merged. They merged the semester that I graduated.
Oh man.
So my GPA took a little dip, but it was still good. Um, but no. I mean, I started getting better, and it literally took me about two to 2.5 years, I want to say, to get into the groove of being a civilian,
Yeah.
of saying,
To being a student, a civilian
yeah,
student, because we
a
haven't even
civilian,
touched the next part yet.
yeah, to being a student, right, and getting. And there was times where I would see that my military character would come out in between classes. I would be trying to, and then remember, it had been years before I'd taken all my math classes and all that stuff, because I'd been in the Marines for 4 or 5 years almost. And it's like you get out, and I'm in school, and I'm trying to pay attention, and there would be these kids that, talking and whatever, and 19-year-olds, 18-year-olds, and there was a couple of times that I snapped in class, and I'd get up and I'd be like, boom. And I look at them and I'd snap at them and pretty much, kind of like knife hand these people. You need to be quiet so I can pay attention to everybody. And then my buddy, they'd be like, hey, you scared the crap out of everybody, and you're over here. And that would happen. But I didn't know, because that's just how it is when you're in military. It's like, hey, you need to do what you need to do, and you're here to do a job. So that was difficult too, like trying to keep that in check, to where it's like, hey, these are regular people. I'm not in the same position that I was at. I need to pay attention. I need to, get used to being a student and get to the goal that I need to get to.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's definitely like you said, a cultural shock. You know,
Hmm.
you're not ready for it. You think you're ready for it, right?
Oh my,
You think that it's just, oh, these guys don't know anything. They don't know this. They don't know that. I'm better. I'm, at this. I'm better at that because I've done this. I've got so much experience. All these things that we have in our brains before we do something like go to school. And so then you get there and you're all of a sudden, it's not what you think it is. It's really not what you think it is.
no,
It's different, and you think you're prepared, but you really aren't.
no, and it makes the isolation becomes even worse,
Yeah.
because it's like you can be surrounded by 1,000 people and feel alone, right? And people can ask you like, "Oh, tell me about your stories." They can be interested in all the stuff you want to say, but you're like, well, at the time too, you're like, well, why do I tell you this? Because you would never understand. Like, they're just cool stories for you, but this is not a cool story for me. This is my life.
Yeah.
This is something
Exactly.
that I went through, that I'm struggling with. You would never understand. So it's like you have these people that are trying to connect with you, that are civilians, because they find you interesting, but it's not in you, and it's like this missing link. That's where your brothers would fill in, that they
Mhm.
were there because you had these shared connections with them. And until recently, like these last 2 years that I've been talking to my buddies that were with me in the Marines, that I started feeling like, okay, I'm getting some traction here. But back then, I felt alone.
That's fair. Yeah, I understand that completely. And so, okay, so you went after a 4 year degree, crushed it in five. What
Yeah.
was the what was the next uh what's the next chapter?
So after that, I was already dating my wife at the time. She was out there getting her master's, right? She's super dedicated, like, at everything she does. So she was kind of like my battle buddy at the time. She was like the one pushing me. Um, I tried to get a job after that, and man, was it hard. because the market was saturated at that time. There was no job openings. There was no future prospects of any kind. And my wife was in San Antonio, and I was like, okay, well, I need to find something nearby.
Hmm.
And I applied, and I wasn't getting anything. And it's, I had experience, construction experience, all kinds of stuff, right? Logistical experience from the Marine Corps, especially organizational experience, things like that. And that, at the end of the day, is I felt like it didn't mean anything. I was like, holy crap, what am I gonna do? I have all these student loans I gotta pay, because I did get student loans at the time.
Yeah.
On top of like the
Was that
GI Bill.
okay?
Yeah, on top of the GI Bill. Yeah, just because at the time I needed it, my family needed it and stuff like that. Um, so did that, and it was a while. And then I remember I had a buddy who went to high school with me. I called him and I said, "Hey man, you know any jobs here in the San Antonio, Austin area?" And he says, "Look, man, I work at elevators, doing elevators, and um, we don't have any openings in our engineering department, but I could try to get you in here to get your foot in the door." And he's like, "I'll give you a job as a helper." And I was like, "Okay, well, I'm unemployed. I need a
Yeah.
job,
Yeah.
at
Yeah.
the time." And
Anything at that point is net positive.
exactly, I was like, I need to start paying some bills. So it's like, okay. And he's like, he's like, as a helper, I can't offer you much. It was $13 an hour. So I went, he took me off. So the whole reason that they hired me there, and then they hired me under the electrical department for the elevators. They're like, they were having some beef with their mechanical engineering department, and I'm a mechanical engineer, so they're like, well, we'll have you do designs for us for brackets and things like that, blah blah blah, so that you can do that for us and make drawings, and we can get parts made without having to go with these guys because these guys take forever. So they were
Okay.
going to kind of show me the learn from the ground up, and they're like, maybe in a year or two you can get into the design department and start working there. I said, okay, whatever. So I came in super open to learning, super unafraid, just excited to start working. My first day on the job, I literally stepped into the door, and they drove me straight to the airport, and we went out to Wisconsin, and we worked on an elevator. And they're like, "Hey, I need you to switch this out." And then there was resistor banks under an elevator, and they're like, "We need to switch them out because they're bad." Had never seen an industrial elevator in my life, not like a
Right.
regular elevator, but these industrial elevators. And I'm an industrial plant. It was freaking cold. There was ice everywhere, and I was like, "Okay, well, I'll do it." Then did that for a couple days, flew back, and they threw me on an installation. So I installed 2 elevators, and I was like, okay, I'll install these elevators. They're like, here's a harness, go climb this 120-foot tower. And I'm climbing around the tower, and I already had construction experience. So they're like, okay, well, we need you to start doing this. And I'm there putting stuff together as how they're telling me. And that kind of just got thrown in. So I did that. I did that for the first 3 months, and then went back, and then I started working at the shop as a helper. I was cutting, grinding, doing all the helper stuff, right? Nobody knew I was an engineer besides my buddy and my buddy and his boss. I'm there. It's this time it's already getting super hot in Austin, right? Because remember, my wife's living in San Antonio and I'm working in Round Rock, so that's like a 3-hour
Oh
drive on the
man.
weekend.
Yeah.
So I was driving that the whole time, like So I did that, and I was even pouring concrete, doing whatever they said. Everything they said, I said yes. So then at the time, the owner walks by, and they had a bunch of projects going on at this place. And I remember when I took the job, I was like, well, what can I learn in elevators? But these guys were doing really custom jobs, one of a kind jobs, things that nobody else does. And these are really robots, and because I always wanted, I was like, okay, well, I'm going to get a research and development job at some high company where I'm going to do the cool stuff. So I
Hmm.
was like, but then I said, then out there, I was like, well, elevators, man. I got to get what I can get, like you said, right? I just need some money. So then they tell me, they're like, "Hey, I know you're an engineer. Um, we need some help. Here's some drawings. Can you make sure that this gets fabricated the way it's supposed to, and keep it on task?" I said, "Yeah,
Hmm.
sure, no problem." This was the first time that was able to get my hands on drawings, started looking and stuff like that, and they were behind
How long into the job was it before they started handing you drawings?
4 months.
4 months. Okay,
Four
gotcha.
months. 4 months. At that before that, my buddy had already tested me. He gave me drawing and he said, "Here, put these electrical panels together." And he thought I had never seen anything. I was like, "Yeah, no, I know electrical systems." And I started wiring all this stuff together. And he's like, "Okay, hey man, you're good." So
Okay.
then I started doing that, and then the owner, the president of the company, came talked to me. I told him my background. I told him I had some experience in construction, and he said, "Hey, start doing this." And I said, "Yeah, sure, no problem." He's like, "The designers in the office, they're too busy to come out here and watch it. They're like, we're gonna try you to do this." I did that. They were behind weeks. In 2 weeks, I caught them up, to what they were doing. So I did a really good job. Within a month, they promoted me to like the shop foreman, and then
Nice.
a month later, they promoted me to the production manager.
Nice.
Right. So this is like already 6, 7 months in, and I'm
Hmm.
already the production manager. They didn't hire anybody else when they promoted me. So I'm
Okay.
carrying the production
You're still
manager.
carrying. Yep.
Yep,
Got
I'm
it.
still doing those jobs, and I'm not saying no to anything. When I became the production manager is when I actually started looking at designs, drawings, getting involved in engineering meetings. And there, I was just, you know, diving all in and getting saturated with everything I knew. And I would stay there long hours and everything like that. I literally would get there at 6, and I wouldn't leave sometimes till like 9, 10 o'clock at night. And I do that. I do that every day, trying to learn as much as I could. And they would give me all these jobs. And I remember I had a friend, her name's Tina, and she'd be like, "Hey," she was the operations manager at the company. She's like, "We're gonna burn them out." And I'd be like, "No, Tina, that's okay." I kept saying yes to everything. So then at the time they had a chief engineer there that the guy was probably in late 50s, early 60s. A lot of experience, came from designing cranes and stuff like that. Well, I started noticing a lot of, they would always have a lot of rework, overtime, because they can never keep up. I got rid of all the overtime, started catching them up with efficiencies, but that's all the stuff that I learned in the military, right? Like finding out what everybody's strengths was and cross training everybody, because I never wanted to be stopped where, like, if I had somebody missing, the job could not stop. I had to make sure that 2 or 3 people knew what was going on with that piece of equipment, with that job or whatever. So when I became the foreman, I started cross training everybody. Then I became the production manager. That's when I started moving people onto different jobs, and everything became more efficient. Flowed better. But I think that all came from the military side, right? Knowing that about those people, and being able to kind of, one, not lead with an iron fist, right? Because like in the Marines, like you can demand respect, earn respect, but the people that earn respect are the people that take care of their guys before they take care of themselves, right? As a leader, you never want to make sure that you don't eat first. Your Marines eat first, right? They drink water first. They do everything first before you do it, because they're the best tools that you have, right? So you have to make sure that they're healthy so that you can be good. And that's a kind of like, I brought that with me going into this job.
Hmm.
And I remember when I graduated, and I had got made friends in college and stuff, and I graduated, and they're like, "What are you gonna do now?" And I said, "I don't know, but wherever I go, I'm gonna be a boss in a year." And I
Oh, there
said
you
that,
go.
and I said that, and I said, "I'm gonna be a boss in a year," and it stuck with me, and I just kept, put my head down, started grinding, and before the year was over, I was already the chief engineer. I took his job. They got rid of him, and I started doing all that. I did all of that, production manager, everything together. And then when I became the chief engineer, I hired one of my friends from college to bring him over, made him the production manager, and we pretty much ran that place almost 7 years.
Okay.
And we got rid of all the rework, did all that, and it was kind of like, if I would say that I wasn't worried or scared, I was. But
Yeah.
I think it was one of those things where, because, you got to remember, like everything that I do, if I mess up, people die. Because these elevators are going, we have elevators that go 1,500 feet to 2,000 feet up in the
Hmm.
air. If that thing fails, you're going to plummet to the ground, right? So you have to have all of those safeties. You have to think about all those things. And there's a lot of pressure there, working with the Navy, the NASA, all those guys, they didn't end up flying for NASA, but worked with all of these companies, right? Worked with all the major aerospace companies, doing all these really out of the box projects that nobody else would touch. And
Right,
it's
and I think that we need to
yeah,
distinguish that, right? Because when people think, oh, Quentin works with elevators, you know, we're thinking what elevators in hotels, we're thinking elevators in apartment complexes, those kinds of things. When really your elevators are much more advanced. They're not just passenger elevators. They're very different. So let's talk about that specifically so that we get into the audience's brain what it is that you deal with that is very um, different than your normal passenger elevator.
right. So the most complicated design that I've had is for an elevator. So most elevators, they're linear, right? Up and down, that's all you think. And maybe you have some that move horizontally, right? And those are more of trams or anything like that, but that's still considered, right? Depending if it says a rack and pinion or geared elevator. Now, we've designed elevators that go on curves and they'll have concave and convex curves. So we've had designed elevators that are 20,000 pounds in capacity and that actually go on a curvilinear path. So this elevator starts going out on a path, and it's in New York,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's in New York, and it's called the Hudson Yards, art vessel. So design that elevator. We've done elevators for the Navy where it's just material, and it has a powered rollers, a forklift comes by, they drop it on the powered rollers, it takes it down to the middle of a huge turntable, and it rotates all the cargo, and then it brings it down, and it brings it down to the nuclear submarines. So
Okay.
that gets rid of a huge crane, right? And it gets rid of having to do 3 days of planning to get all these lifts approved and everything like that. We have other elevators that go 1,500 feet underground, right? I mean, this hat here, they brought it in January from the South Pole. I had two guys out on the South Pole working on an elevator out there. So it's like we are working our elevators. We have elevators now that get blown up like once a week. They have rockets going off right next to them, and we're
Mm-hmm.
talking about the biggest engines there is. Can't say who, but they're there. It's it's all of these elevators, are very unique in the sense that they all serve different purposes, and like the elevators that everybody's used to, and the the hotels, the hospitals, everything like that, those designs haven't changed for 20, 30 years. The only things that change are the controls, and they get updated a little bit here. The panels get a little bit, better, and you might see some automation or some touchscreen stuff here and there, but that's very simple stuff. Now, when it comes to like the stuff that we do, it's the mechanical things that you have to design. We have elevators that are in, the South Pole elevator has to be able to function in negative 80 degrees Fahrenheit.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's extreme cold, right? And you know that you have to have specialized material, specialized, lubricants, all of that stuff has to be taken into consideration. So then now it becomes very complicated, very complex. That's something that I never expected to get into when I first started working on elevators. I thought I was going to be like, okay, well, it's just elevators. I'm just going to go, and it's going to be like being not even a mechanic, right? But because cars are pretty complex nowadays too. But it's one of those things where it's, you don't expect much from it, but it has been a challenge, very fulfilling. And it's one of those things where you get to travel a lot, for what I've been. And you see me, like the times you do see
I've
me, like, hey
seen.
man, I'm like, hey man, sorry, I was out in Germany, I was out here, I was out there, worldwide. And it's like, it takes me everywhere.
Yeah.
um but
But that's also just recently too. I'm sorry to interrupt, but
yeah.
that's also just recently too because you. So we're jumping back just a little bit. You graduate, you start doing menial, quote unquote menial jobs, but you're building yourself up. Within the year, you're now the chief engineer at this elevator company. You hire your buddy from school, from college. You guys run that place super efficiently for 7 years or so, is what you said, I think, right? And then you decide to do something crazy, in my opinion. Let's
Yeah.
talk about that.
So the company where I was at, I loved working there, right?
Hmm.
It was a smaller company, and because it was a smaller company, I was able to learn a whole lot very quickly, right? Um, it unfortunately, like I had a difference with the owners and how they didn't want to expand in the way that I thought we could, right? I thought we had a lot more there, and I had more ambition than they did. So right before COVID, I went on a trip, and we went out to a convention, and we met with some of the competitors, right? And we
Hmm.
met with some of the biggest manufacturers in industrial elevators in the world. And I was there, introduced myself. Some of them already knew of me because of the projects that we've done. Some of the things that we do, they're known. It's a very small community, and you know, right before COVID, I told myself, I said, okay, this is something here. This is my next step, because I told myself that I would give myself 3 years where I was at, and then I would move to do something better. But it took me 7 years because I kept learning, right? I felt that there was still more there to accomplish, and these projects were so long that I said, okay, I'm still learning. I need to build up my resume. And the thing that scared me too was that who would believe that resume?
Okay.
Who's gonna say, okay, yeah, right, you just graduated in a year, you became a chief engineer, and you took over, multi-million dollar projects, and you ran 4 or 5 projects at the same time, and you did all these jobs. You were the production manager, the chief engineer, you designed, you went out to the field, you did all this stuff together. No, nobody's gonna believe that.
Okay.
But what I felt that I had there was a drive, and I was already used to being sleep deprived. I was already used to working so much and not like your body tells you, hey, you're giving up, and you're like, no, you stop when I tell you to stop. You get what I'm saying? And it's like one of those things where like even you like sometimes will ask me in the gym like, hey man, you feeling okay? And I'm not, but I'm like, yeah, I'm good, and
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll still go. Yeah, I'll still go. And it's like it's that mentality where we kept going. So when we get to this convention, I said, this is the next step. And I remember I told my buddy that I brought with me, his name is Gaspar, and I said, okay. I told him he wanted to leave the company. He's like, look, we're small. I feel like for me, because he was a production man, he's like, I feel for me that I need to go somewhere else and grow, right? Because you in your career, you don't want to be stagnant, right? You
Right.
always want to get to the next step because the next step gets you. And after this, I'll explain a little bit more why. But he wanted to leave, and I told him, no, you know what? Wait, give me a couple of months, and you'll understand why. So at this time, I'm formulating my plan as to what I'm going to do. And during this time, I reached out to this competitor because there was only one competitor that wasn't represented in the United States,
Hmm.
and they're like the third largest. Probably now they're in the top three of manufacturers for industrials worldwide. They don't have a direct representation in the U.S. They had people that would sell their brand and stuff like that, but they don't have a Stroh's company right here. So they're called Stroh's Elevators. That's who we are, Stroh's North America. So Stroh's didn't have somebody here. So I reached out to them, and it was like a back and forth for a couple of months, explaining. You know, they talked to some people, right? To some other people. They're like, hey, we have this guy Quintin. They're like, oh, we know Quintin. We know who he is. So that kind of validated me. And then they're like, okay, we have somebody. I already had a full team that I was ready to bring over. At first, I wasn't looking to be partners. I was looking for a job. I wanted to move to the next step. I was going to say, let's open a branch here for you, and let me be your CEO. Let me run it, let me grow it, and I will look to get compensated. Maybe down the future, maybe some profit sharing or something, or some shares.
Yeah.
And that's how
Absolutely.
the plan started. And they were like, look, this is super risky. We don't know the US market. We don't know this. We don't know that. It's obviously the biggest market, the most important market. And I knew it very well. So they're like, but what we're willing to do with you is partner with you. You do it, and we'll partner with you. And I said, okay, well, that's even better. But they weren't going to put in, I told them, my pitch was, you give me the name, I will get the customers because I have all the contacts already. I will improve your product. I will service your product, and I will get more jobs than you've had. You know, and you know they finally, we were talking and talking, and they weren't saying yes. So I'm still
Okay.
working at this other company, and Thanksgiving break comes by, and I tell them, hey, I gotta go. My buddy is getting married in Germany, and I'm gonna leave, and I'm gonna go over there and be out there. So I'm gonna be back a little couple days. You know, so I left during Thanksgiving break just in case they ask, hey, where are you? I am in Germany, but I wasn't in Germany. I was in Czech Republic.
Okay.
So I went and met with the owner there. 5 hour meeting with that owner telling me no, that this is risky, that they see the potential, but that they've never done something like this, and they've never partnered with anybody else. They never done this and that, so they've always said no to
Hmm.
everybody. 5 hours, and then the owner finally says, you know what? Okay, we'll talk to you. And then that was kind of we had a handshake deal, and then I had dinner with the commercial director the next day, not the owner. He's like, hey, the owner couldn't make it, but he wants me to tell you, yes, we're moving forward. So then that's when that happened, right? So then it was a year of setting everything up, right? So once that yes was given, 6 months later, 3 months later, I established a company. Then 3 months after that, I left the company where I was at, and I was working on a big project that I was going to get through Stroh's, and I thought it was going to happen quickly. And man, that was I wrong. I left my last company, and it was probably a month, and they're like, no, well, they kept pushing it back, pushing it back, pushing it back, and I was like, this was going to be a life changing, project. It was going to
Yeah.
change my life and from in one day, and it didn't happen. And I remember I went to Philadelphia with my wife, and she's like, I was like, look, if something doesn't happen, because I still didn't have any jobs with Stroh's, we were still establishing the company. Because it takes time to get everything, all the administrative insurances, all that stuff set up. And remember, when I went to these guys, the reason they said yes, and I didn't say this now or earlier, but I told them that they would have zero investment, that we would start with a $0 investment. They wouldn't have to invest anything into us. We had zero seed money. I used the contracts that we were going to get to finance, self finance. So that's what we did. And we set everything up, and it just wasn't happening as quickly as I wanted it to. So I told my wife, I was like, I guess I'm gonna have to get a job here at an Amazon warehouse or something,
Hmm.
just to pay the bills, to pay the mortgage, right? Where I'm on the flight back, and I get a phone call from one of my friends who's a brilliant engineer out of Houston, and I'm talking about world class engineer, this guy, and he gives me he calls me and says, hey, Quintin, I have a job where we're designing a new crane that's gonna self-erect itself, and it's gonna build these 400-foot wind turbines, and we can go even higher and stuff like that. And he's like, I really need a good engineer to help me, somebody that has the experience that you have. And I remember I told him, I was like, well, how much does this job pay? And he's like, well, $60 an hour. And I was like,
Hmm.
well, I was like, that's way more than what I was getting paid at Tower Elevators, right?
Yeah.
And I told him, I was like, okay, well, that's more than I was getting paid at my other job. And I said, okay, then um, that, and I told him, I was like, well, the only way I'll go is if you hire my buddy too, because we're a package.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
like, well, he's like, do you guys have your own equipment? Yeah, we got our own computers, our own software. We'll do everything. So then we got hired on and started doing that. And that, I think, was just a blessing, because we were already getting scared, because Gaspar and I had left this company, and we left it because we were like, it's time to leave it. It's you can't go halfway in. You can't do something halfway. You have to leave it and be 100% in, or don't do it at all. So we went in full steam ahead, and it wasn't happening right away. So we said, okay, well, we picked this other job to help us through the way. And man, it was a blessing, because we worked with on this, designing this. We got our names put on the patent and stuff like that, and we did that for a year. But at the same time, kept establishing Stroh's North America.
Hmm.
So we did that, And, that October of the year that we left, we went to Germany for the biggest construction convention in the world.
Okay.
And that's where they gave us the green light to start pursuing work. They said,
Okay.
hey, finally, everything's good. Go out there and, start getting work. And so, okay, fine. So after that, we came back, November went by, December went by. Obviously, those are like the slower months because people are all about the holidays. But by March, we scored our first big contract. We were already working, doing some service here and there, fixing some elevators, like the little jobs, and that did pay very well, but there were little jobs comparison to what we did. So March came around, and we got our first huge contract with like the biggest client you can think of. And, Stroh's from the Czech Republic hadn't sold anything before COVID.
Mm-hmm.
So it would have been like 3 or 4 years where they hadn't sold any permanent industrial elevators. And they were hurting. They're like, we haven't gotten anything in the US market. And they had like 2 dealers that were here before that couldn't sell anything. I said, okay. So in our first year, starting March, this March was year 1. We're already into year 2, going to year 3. So that first March, from that March to the next, and that within that year, from March to March, we sold 11 elevators.
Dang.
So we did that, and we were installing. We bought construction hoists like for rentals. We started doing that, and obviously, like in this, what makes this industry so difficult is that everything comes in the back end. You have to have everything financed at the beginning. You get no profits until you finish a job. So it's all back end, and for somebody that had zero financing, didn't have any investment, we did it the hardest way you could possibly do it. And I'm not saying we've made it. It's still difficult to do, but we've been chugging along already for like 3 years, and we're finally starting to see the profits come in of our work, starting to feel some more relief, continue to get more projects. Like I said, we sent these guys out to the South Pole, and it's like now we're getting into all the aerospace. We're getting into all of these, refineries and stuff like that. And there's so many elevators out there. We're finally hiring like more people. Like we're slowly growing. But what I wanted to say before, and I kind of went ahead of myself, but when you get out of the military and like say like I went to school and then I started working and I never said no to anything. What I realized then was that I took on a job where my value was $13 an hour
Mm-hmm.
with a college degree, right?
Mm-hmm.
I understood that I was investing in myself because to anybody else, that would have been disheartening. Not being able to get a job right away. And if anybody takes anything from this, it's that you have to go through the tough to get to the good. And going through that trouble of saying I'm investing in myself, right? Going to college was investing in myself, putting myself in a little bit of debt, taking a low paying job to get my foot in the doors, investing in myself, and then doing this for all these years and being patient and then planning it out and having an exit strategy. Everything's been going according to plan up till now, thank God. But it was all about building up my self-worth because when I got out, I had no idea what it was. I didn't know. I didn't know okay, you have a degree, how much should I get paid? Everybody wants to get paid the big bucks. But it's Texas, right? It's Texas. Like how many people do pay you that, right? And even during this time, check this, right? And I didn't even bring this up too. I got that job, right? Once I got that job, I had another friend who called me and she works for the community college here.
Mm-hmm.
They give classes for Tesla, give classes for Samsung, and all these other things, right? They got engineers there that they do give these classes. They called me and they said, okay, hey, you know what? We want you to come in and give some classes for us on the stuff that you're an expert on. Well, I don't consider myself an expert, but what I'm knowledgeable on. And these classes, I was getting $80 to $120 an hour, from $13 an hour to $80 to $120 an hour, just to give classes, which was the easiest job I have ever done in my life. Because it's giving classes to these kids, and it's like, but I think all of that happened once I made the decision to leave where I was at, the scariest decision I ever made. to leave that place and not having certainty, because at the end of the day, I still had to provide for me and my wife, and make sure we had a roof over our head. And I took that leap. And it's like literally within less than a month, we got this job where I'm almost getting paid almost twice as much. And then I get a teaching job that's the easiest job I get that pays 3, 4 times as much. And it's like, you know, like they're all blessings, right? And it's one of those things where I'm really grateful, and I learned to recognize it,
Yeah.
because I never thought that, though, I deserve this. I've never had that thought that I deserve anything. You get what I'm saying? It's like one of those things where it's like, and I never felt like I deserved to get all this. I didn't, right? I was just kind of going through it and trying to be what I could be, and saying, let's see what happens here, what happens here. And then once I started building myself up, and I said, you know what? And this is when I told you, like, I started talking to my buddies again and made this transition where I said, I left the company, that I'm moving on to build my own. That's when I started saying, you know what? I don't think I deserve it, but it's attainable. And it's like one of those things where, like, hey, I'm not just doing it for me, because I've never been a selfish person, but it's like I think that I can do this, and I know that I can do this, and it's been happening, and it's one of those things where you work hard and you put your head down, and you don't let anybody tell you that you can't, because that's all you have. Is you'll have a lot of people that will tell you you can't. And I think it's what I learned in the military, and going through all that, doing more with less, that really pushed me forward. I don't think I would have been able to do that. Obviously, my wife is like my main support, but if it wasn't for like that and her, I don't think I'd be doing any of this.
Well, the support that she brings is just next level,
Yeah.
especially for you. And I love the fact that you acknowledge that. And I love the fact that you give her the appreciation that she deserves,
Oh yeah.
especially on this show. I thank you for that, and I'm sure she does too.
Oh yeah. And if I can say one more thing too, it's, I think you and I have talked about it, and I don't know how much time we have here, Rob. I don't want to
We
go
got
over.
time.
Okay. It's one of those things where, all of this, going through all this stuff, getting to this point, right? It seems like, oh man, this guy was just, it's just persevering, and just pushing forward and being able to do it, and like just being tough and having grit. But that's not the case, because this is the most difficult time that I've ever had.
Mm-hmm.
Like during and after the military, it's because, you know, like I told you, they never told me what to do when I got out. And I felt that I had issues when I went out. But like I told you, I've always felt like I've never deserved anything. And it's one of those things that I don't want to say it's indoctrinated into you, but it's one of those things that, hey, just be grateful with what you have and do your job with what you have. Because it always could be worse for you, right? Like I told you, going to the Philippines and see, I saw people living in trash houses and all that stuff. So that humbled me. That gave me like, oh man, I have it made. Made. I can never complain about anything. Then when a lot of my buddies came back and they were blown up, they were shot, all this stuff, and I'm like, I jacked up my knee, I did this, or something happened to me, and I'm like, I still got all my fingers, I still got my both my feet, I can walk, I can, somewhat run, do this. What do I have to complain about? You know what I mean? So it's that mentality that I think sometimes holds us back a lot.
Yeah, that's true.
Because I feel that if I would, when I started this and I started, getting the support system that I have now, if I would have done that when I got out, I would be
Yeah.
years ahead of where I'm at. And obviously, right, like we said, hindsight's 2020, right? But it really does. It gets in your head, because you like, man, that's time that I could have been better. I could have gotten better. I never seeked for help. I didn't even talk to the VA up until last year. 9 years after I EAS'd.
Yeah.
9 years.
Yeah. How was
That,
that? And you're still working with them, right?
yeah, yeah. So right now, I just got last year got 70%, right, disability. I didn't claim everything because I didn't want to make like the super long thing where it would take forever. I was already feeling like a certain way, like overwhelmed with everything I had going on. Like
And
doing all of this.
yeah, and you also mentioned we talked about this before we got on the air. Is you also had that same thought like you don't feel like you deserve it because you have friends who have lost limbs, who have been blown up, who have all these things that have happened to them. Whereas you, me, and a lot of other folks, we still have full functionalities. We have all our limbs, and there's that mentality of they deserve it more than I do.
Exactly. And I did that for 9 years. And then it's like you're always thinking about the physical, right? Because it's what you see in the mirror. But nobody sees like how you're feeling inside, your emotional state, your mental state. You can only, I think you can only tough it out for so long. And I would always, think about, oh man, we lost another brother to or something like that because they didn't look for help because it was that same mentality to where I can do this on my own. And you carry this weight after so long, and you know that if you carry a piece of paper and you hold your arm out for so long, that thing starts becoming the heaviest thing after an hour, even after a couple of minutes. So imagine carrying that weight that you carry from the things that you live through, which everybody lives through, similar but different things in the service. Carry that with you without any help for so many years. I could see how that weighs on people. And then at the same time, trying to learn and absorb and be successful in the civilian life, all those stressors and feeling alone, and then like not having that support system that you had when you were in the military, and that same active lifestyle, it gives you all this time to think. And I think that's what a lot of veterans don't see, is that their mental health is what takes, besides like gaining weight, right? You could always exercise and get better and eat better and healthier, but if it's not here, the body won't follow, right? And all those outside stressors, like that shock that when you get out, I think it compounds and exacerbates. It makes it worse.
Mhm.
Like it just and you feel alone, but in reality, we're all going through it. So my thing is that once you start making those friends that hey, look out for the community, the military community, you know, you start making these connections with these people that are similar to you. They don't have to be the same, but they start backing you up. And it's one of those things that where regardless of what branch you're in or what you got through, everything like that, I know that no questions asked. No questions asked. That they'll back you up. Even if you don't know each other that much. It's just one of those things where I think you have to be a certain type of person to be in the military,
Yeah.
right? I'm not saying it nobody can convince you to go. If you have to be convinced by somebody to go, you shouldn't. I would never tell somebody, oh, you should join the military because of this. It's something that you choose to do if you want to be successful at it. I don't think that anybody says, oh, okay, well, I got convinced to do this and I'm going to do it, because you're going to be miserable. You're going to hate it and things are going to happen. But the people that do join the military because they wanted to join the military, I think those people are the more successful, the people that are different, that have a different mindset, right? But it also becomes difficult when you get out because now you're not in that environment anymore. And it took me 9 years to look for help because, and it's hard for me talk to people about that. But I think the more that you tell people, not have to go into details, but tell people that, hey, I'm going through struggles too, but it took me 9 years. So don't be ashamed to look for that help. And the sooner you look for that help and the sooner you look for your people, the better it's going to be for you going forward and for your loved ones. And if anybody can take aside from like being persistent and going to school and doing things after the military, how to help yourself. Because we're taught to take care of people and not take care of ourselves first.
Yeah. I would agree. Would absolutely
That's
agree with that.
I think that's the hardest thing that you have to do, is learn how to take care of yourself before before taking care of others. You got to be a little bit more selfish and take care of this so everything else can follow. I think that's the hardest lesson that I've learned in all these years. And I'm not saying that it's gone; it's still there. But those 9 years, I was suffering alone, even though I had my wife, because I didn't want to. You don't put that on them.
Right. You don't want to burden her. Um,
Exactly.
and so you suffer silently on. with yourself through yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
understand. I understand that. I did that myself, and then but I'm glad now that you've built uh, something to where you can actually talk to people.
Yeah. And I'm glad you're you're doing this, because I feel like not a lot of people do it to where it's like, hey, let me hear other stories to know that, man, that guy sounds just like me.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's really all it is we already know that we can work, and we work hard. All of us. We all have that potential to work hard. We've done it already, the years that we've been in the military. Now it's getting out and adjusting to a new lifestyle, but getting that support system to where you don't feel alone. Because it's a very lonely place when you're taken out of your element. Because when you're in the military, it's go, go, go every day. You have your brotherhood. It's all, you guys can hate each other because you're there 24/7, but man, do you love those guys. And you would never let anything happen to them. You know what I mean? It's like those guys can call, and thousands of them. I can call any of those guys right now, and I said I needed something. They dress from anywhere and come get me, and I would do the same for them. But it's those things that you leave and you don't have that anymore. So I think it's getting that help and realizing that you do need help. Nobody does anything alone,
Yeah,
and I don't think.
and I think though I feel like type 2 fun, is really just how we as veterans, as service members, former service members, current service members, type 2 fun is basically how we make friends, right? And type 2 fun was really just when you suffer together, it brings you closer. Like when you're out in the field, when you're out doing training, when you're out deployed, when you're out doing things that are hard, that are difficult, but you're doing it together, like that is what brings people together. And um, my success story is I didn't actually like have a good mentality until after I started going to our gym, right? Because once I found again the people who are willing to do hard things with you, that's when you make a lot more friends, and that's how you make that connection, right? I can still go out and talk to random people on the street. I had a ex-girlfriend who used to tell me that he's fine, he can talk to a wall, right?
Yeah,
And that's true. But if you want me to have a genuine connection with someone, if you're willing to do hard things, do difficult things with me, we will be like we will be almost inseparable. I will tell
and
you that.
that's funny, because that's the thing I tell my wife. It's like, your memories are never of the easy, good thing.
Right?
The best memories are always of the suck, right? Everything that
Yeah.
sucks, right? Hey, we went on a hike and we got stuck in a typhoon, and we got stuck on this thing, and we're over here hanging for dear lives, and we're driving through a snowstorm out of nowhere, some freak accident thing, and then those become your best memories, right? Obviously, at the moment, you're like, oh man, I'm so scared and all this stuff, but at the end of the day, you look back on it, and those are the things that you remember,
Yeah.
you know, and
That's
it really is like when you go through something difficult with somebody, that's when you forge real connection.
Yeah, that's right. And that's so funny that you say that because a lot of times when we talk to our friends, back in the military, we don't talk about like, oh, you remember that time when we went to that barbecue at this person's house and we just sat around and watched football? Like you don't
No.
talk about that. That's not like no one talks about that. We talk about, do you remember that time when we were just sitting there having this random conversation and you said, you never know, things can happen at any time. And as soon as you said that, a rocket hit right 30 feet from us. And I was like,
Yep.
yes, I remember that. And that is a true story that happened to me on my first deployment to Iraq. Um, but I don't
Oh
want to get
man.
into that. um,
Yeah. Yeah,
um,
that's the kind of stuff that, yeah, I talk to my buddies all the time, and there was one story that I will tell you that's super funny, and it's such a small world, right? Because when I was working at my last company, I had a friend there who I went to go help him at his house, and
mhm.
his neighbor, and I was helping him at his house. I stayed there. We were doing some remodeling, and his neighbor was in the Marines too. So we were drinking some beers and stuff, and he was like, "Hey, man," and I was like, "Oh yeah, Anthony told me you're in the Marines." I was like, "Yeah, me too." He said, "Where?" He's like, "Where are you stationed?" And I was like, "Oh, Camp Pendleton." I was like, "Where were you stationed?" He's like, "Okinawa." I was like, "Oh, I was in Okinawa." I was like, "What camp were you in?" He's like, "Oh, Hampton." I was like, "Oh, me too." And then we were talking to him, and I was like, "What unit were you with?" And they were with a unit called Seventh Com. They used to be called Seventh Crime because man, I'm telling you, when you're over there, you don't know what to do. And I remember we were at a concert. They had a concert. It was E40, Pitbull, and I don't know who else. And that too was hot at the time. We were all there. My whole unit was there. We were at that concert,
I mean, he is
and
Mr. Worldwide, so
yeah, Mr. World, yeah. And then we left that concert, and a huge brawl breaks out between our unit and Seventh Com, and I was
no.
in that brawl. And I told him, I was like, "Yeah, man, when I was there, this happened." He's like, "No way." He's like, "This guy was in the same brawl that I was in when we were deployed in Okinawa." So I was like, "Oh my God, that's so crazy." But those are the
Like,
kind of
I
things that
punched
we're,
you in the face, you punched me in the face.
yeah, I know. And we're over here drinking beer and, halfway around across the world, and we run into each other in the smallest town.
That's
Yeah.
hilarious. That's how the military works, though. That's how life works too. I love
Exactly.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, me too. And it's one of those things, you get back to it, and obviously you don't get those times back, but it's you found it in the gym, and man, those guys are great. Everybody there's great, and it's like a great community, right? And I think it's for me, it was getting to meet new people that were also in the military and becoming friends with them and being open to making new friends, and also reconnecting with my friends from the military, because we are each other's support system. Even though we're not in the same place, we call each other. Now I'm more open to doing that, and I think as we've grown, we've matured some more. Because when we just got out, man, we just call and BS and like everything's fine, but it was
Yeah.
because you don't want them to worry about you. But then as you grow older, it's like, yeah, man, I was going through a hard time, and then you start saying like, well, me too. And
Yeah.
then we've kind of went through this thing where it's like, hey, you know what? If you feel a certain way, call me, and we'll be on the phone for an hour, 2 hours, and then we'll talk it through. But that's the thing. I think it's the most important, and the hardest thing to do is when you get out is admitting that you need help if you do, right? And finding that support system,
I
and
absolutely agree with that.
so I think for the young guys that are going to get out, even the older guys, is it's find it,
Yeah.
do it, because you've already done the hard stuff. You might as well, you want to enjoy what comes next.
Yeah. And that really leads me on to these last two questions as we wrap up here, because you're about to hit something that I think is going to answer these questions perfectly. You mentioned hindsight's 2020. With what you know now, uh, this many years outside of the military, what's one piece of advice that you would give someone who is either starting their transition or just about to get out or is already out and is like within that first few months of I don't know what I'm doing right now. What's a piece of advice that you want to give to that person?
Well, I would say is it's really scary, right? The military doesn't define who you are, right? What
Ooh,
job you had in
good
the military
point.
doesn't define who you are. You are a very unique individual, right? And you have a certain set of skills, of interest. I think the most important thing that I can tell somebody is find what makes you happy. Really is it, and and like I said, be a little bit selfish, because think about yourself, what's going to make you happy, because if you're happy, you're going to make somebody else happy if that's what you want to do, right? Be in a relationship, whatever it is. But in order to do something like that, you need to be good with yourself. So I say find out what that thing is and put it down on paper. If I would have known what I know now and done that, I would have been so much further along. And I would have been, I would have felt better about where I'm at and things like that. And so for me, it's find out who you want to be, right? Where you want to be, because you are who you are, but don't let that define you. And it's if you realize that, hey, I'm a person that needs X, Y, and Z, this is how I'm going to get X, Y, and Z, whether that be help through the VA, help through a support system, go out and find friends that have common interest, and that will push you naturally to do better and progress into what you want to do. School's not for everybody. People want to do work, they want to go into real estate, they want to do different things, but that's why I say don't put yourself in a box and find out who you are. You know what I mean? So that's, I think, figuring that out as soon as you get out or when you're getting out, it's easier said than done. But taking those baby steps to it, it's what's going to really help, push you along.
Yeah.
And, I think that's really important.
Yeah, I agree. I would argue that finding out who you are outside of the military is literally the hardest thing that every veteran goes through. I'm on Reddit forums for veterans, and people all the time talk about, I don't know what I'm doing. I hate the fact that I'm doing, X, Y, or Z. When I was in the military, I was this. I read one the other day. It's like, I've been out of the military for 4 years and I hate it. And it's like, you haven't figured out who you are. Inside of the military, this is who you are. This is the person, the soldier, the Marine, the airman, the sailor, the guardian that you have been. And um, now that you have now experienced outside of that, now you have to figure out how this little fish fits into the even bigger pond of the world. And that's really difficult to do. And, like you said, it took you, years. It took me years and multiple failures to finally figure out that, you know, I wasn't meant to be a logistics professional outside of the military. I was supposed to be something completely different that I didn't even plan on. And same with you. You were like, I'm going to be a fighter pilot and then go to NASA. Now all of a sudden you work in elevators, and you you manage and maintain elevators across the globe. And
Yeah.
that is impressive. And that is
Don't work with
completely
NASA,
different.
but
Yeah.
yeah, don't work for them, but work with them.
Right. And that's a whole nother set of rules. But with that being said, this is the final question. What's one thing that you did in the military and the Marine Corps that you picked up and you still can't put down today?
Oh man, I don't know necessarily if this is a good thing or bad thing, but I have a lot of habits. I have a lot of
Let's hear
habits
them.
that for one, all my buddies. I have a buddy who was in the army and he was special forces and stuff like that. And he's like, dude, you are the most paranoid person I have ever met. He's like, you walk into a place and you're just like looking all over, you're checking your rearview mirrors, you're looking all over the place, and it's one of those things where it's like, even my wife's like, you need to relax a little bit, and it's like, no, yeah, yeah, I'm good, but I'm always overly prepared for everything, right? What I did take from there is I rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it.
There you
So
go.
if we go camping, I got tourniquets, quick clot, I got everything that I need. I got the tubes. If I'm gonna stick a tube through somebody's nose and put it in their throat, everything. I got
Yeah.
all that stuff. I always have it, and
You have to
it
make sure that you are still trained on it, though, right?
yes,
Like, you have to, like, that's partly the thing that I hated the most was taking a nasal pharyngeal and through the nose and into, like, I hated that for sure. But I trained on it, and
mhm.
you just got to remember, like, even back then you had to redo that training at least once a year. So I would suggest that now, like, keep up with that.
Yeah, for sure, because things do change. Even like CPR training and stuff like that is different.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
You don't even breathe in their mouth anymore. You just chest
no,
compressions.
exactly. Yeah, my wife does CPR certifications,
Oh,
but
she does?
yeah, you need it.
Yes.
All right, I'll tell her.
Okay.
But she yeah, all that stuff. I still eat extremely fast.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yep. You got
I
to be
am
the first one done.
extremely fast. And my wife's like, "Why do you eat so fast?" She's like, "That's why you get full so fast." I was like, "Look, I don't know when I need to get up and run, And if we're gonna run and we're not gonna eat for a while, at least I'm the one that has a full belly.
Yeah.
Like I need that energy, but it's one of those things where you just get used to it, and I haven't been able to shake it. And it's like if I try to slow down, literally, it's impossible for me.
Yeah. I know exactly what you mean. I actually have to consciously think to put my fork down to have a conversation with someone, especially like if I'm on a date and I will like blast through like eating my food just on a normal day. I actually have to consciously think like take 2 bites, put the fork down, sit back, turn to the person, have ask a question, blah blah blah. Like those are things that are happening in my brain instead of eat, 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 and then have a conversation. So it's really weird. So I understand completely where you're coming from.
Yeah.
Quintin, thank you so much for taking the time this afternoon to chat with me. I'm sure we're going to follow up, see how things are going, because you said you've got 70% now through your VA, but it sounds like you're ready to go back for some other stuff.
Yeah, I just resubmitted, the other physical stuff that I got going on. So I just did that actually yesterday.
Everyone, take a moment, like, share, comment, subscribe, ring that notification bell, and we'll see you next time. Later, lads.